Mary Jones lived alone in her small house on Green Street. She was 65 years old, and everyone in Pinetown knew her as the kind lady who baked the best chocolate chip cookies. Every Thursday, she would give these cookies to the neighborhood kids who played in the park across from her house. Her white cat Snow always sat in the window, watching the children laugh and play. Life was simple but happy for Mary. Her only daughter Kate visited her every weekend with her two kids, Tom, who was 10, and Lisa, who was 8. They loved spending time at Grandma's house, especially since their dad Jack had passed away 2 years ago from what doctors said was a heart problem. One sunny Saturday morning, Kate arrived with the kids as usual. She noticed something different about her mother right away. Mary looked tired, and her hands were shaking as she poured orange juice for breakfast. "Mom, are you okay?" Kate asked, worried. "Oh dear, I'm fine." Mary smiled weakly. "Just feeling a bit tired these days. Dr. Smith gave me some new medicine last week. He's such a helpful young doctor. Even brings the medicine to my house since I don't drive anymore." That evening, before leaving, Tom and Lisa hugged their grandma extra tight. Mary gave them more cookies than usual, saying, "Take some extra for tomorrow, my sweeties." The next morning, Kate tried calling her mother, but there was no answer. Worried, she drove to Mary's house. She found her mother sitting in her favorite blue chair, looking peaceful, as if she was sleeping. But Mary wasn't sleeping. She had died. Dr. Smith came quickly when Kate called him. "It was just old age," he said gently. "She died peacefully in her sleep. Many old people go this way." He helped Kate arrange the funeral, even bringing flowers from his own garden. The whole town came to say goodbye to Mary. Even Mrs. Brown, Mary's best friend for 30 years, came in her wheelchair. She had been sick lately, too. "Such a shame," people whispered. First Jack, now Mary, both gone so peacefully in their sleep. A month later, Kate was cleaning her mother's house. She found an old diary hidden under Mary's pillow. The last page made her heart stop. It read, "Something strange is happening. These new pills make me feel worse. Called Betty Brown yesterday. She's taking similar pills from Dr. Smith and feels sick too. The same thing happened to my son-in-law Jack before he died. Must tell Kate about." The writing stopped there. Kate's hands started shaking. She remembered how her husband, Jack, had also complained about feeling strange after taking medicine from Dr. Smith just days before he died. That same evening, Kate got a call. Mrs. Brown had died in her sleep, too. Natural causes, they said. Dr. Smith had already signed the death certificate. Kate sat in her mother's blue chair, holding the diary. 3 deaths, her father, her mother, and now Mrs. Brown. All patients of Dr. Smith, all natural causes, all after taking his special medicine. But there was something else bothering Kate, something she hadn't told anyone. 2 days before her mother died, she had seen Dr. Smith talking to Mr. Wilson, the richest man in Pinetown. Mr. Wilson had been trying to buy all the houses on Green Street to build a shopping mall. Mary had always refused to sell her house. Now, looking at her mother's diary, Kate noticed something else. A small paper had fallen out. It was a bank statement showing that someone had been taking small amounts of money from her mother's account every week. The withdrawals started the same week. Dr. Smith began bringing those special pills. Kate looked out the window at Snow, still sitting there waiting for Mary to come home. Across the street, she saw Dr. Smith's car parked outside another elderly patient's house. Through the window, she could see him, smiling kindly, as he handed over some medicine. The sun was setting on Pinetown, casting long shadows across Green Street. Kate didn't know it yet, but she had just discovered the first thread of a dark secret that would change everything in their peaceful little town. Behind the closed doors and friendly smiles, something evil was growing, and it was far from over. Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've simplified the language while maintaining suspense and adding more layers to the mystery. I've introduced clear motives, the shopping mall plan, additional suspicious deaths, Jack and Mrs. Brown, and evidence of financial fraud. The next section can explore these threads further while introducing new twists. Kate couldn't sleep that night. The diary kept playing on her mind. At 3 a.m., she turned on her computer and started searching for news about deaths in Pinetown over the last 2 years. What she found made her stomach turn. 12 elderly people had died in their sleep. All were Dr. Smith's patients. All had refused to sell their houses to Mr. Wilson. She made a list of the dead: her father Jack, her mother Mary, Mrs. Brown, old Mr. Peters who owned the corner store, Miss Linda who ran the flower shop, Mr. Thompson who had that big house near the park. The list went on. Kate noticed something else. All of them had died within weeks of getting special medicine from Dr. Smith. The next morning, while dropping Tom and Lisa at school, Kate saw something that made her heart skip. Dr. Smith was talking to Mrs. Roberts, their kind old music teacher, who lived next door to Mary's house. Mrs. Roberts was the last person on Green Street who hadn't sold her house to Mr. Wilson. "Oh, Kate!" Mrs. Roberts waved when she saw her. "Dr. Smith was just telling me about some new vitamins that could help with my arthritis. Such a caring doctor, isn't he? Just like he was with your mother." Kate forced a smile but felt sick inside. That evening, she drove to Mrs. Roberts' house with a box of Mary's cookies she had frozen. "Mrs. Roberts," Kate said carefully while they had tea, "has anyone asked you about selling your house lately?" The old lady's face darkened. "Oh yes, that Mr. Wilson was here again last week. Offered me double what the house is worth. But I told him what I always tell him. This house holds 50 years of memories. I'm not selling." Just then, Kate noticed something on Mrs. Roberts' coffee table that made her blood run cold. A small bottle of pills with Dr. Smith's handwriting on it. "Did you start taking these?" Kate asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not yet, dear. Starting tomorrow. Dr. Smith said they work best when you take them right before bed." Kate pretended to knock her teacup over, spilling it on the pills. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me clean that up." She quickly grabbed the pills with the napkin and stuffed them in her pocket. That night, Kate drove to Pinetown Police Station. Officer Mike Parker was there. He had been her friend since high school. "Mike, I need your help," Kate said, placing the pill bottle and her mother's diary on his desk. "But first, I need to know something. Who signs the papers when someone dies in their sleep at home?" "Usually the family doctor," Mike replied. "In most cases, it's Dr. Smith. He's been here 20 years, most trusted doctor in town." "And who handles the sale of houses after people die?" Mike thought for a moment. "Real estate agent Bill Cooper. Works with Mr. Wilson a lot." He paused. "Come to think of it, he's Dr. Smith's brother-in-law." Kate's hands were shaking as she pushed the diary toward Mike. "Read this, and I want these pills tested." As Mike read the diary, his face got darker. He looked up at Kate. "Wait here," he said, walking to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder. 3 months ago, a young nurse named Sarah started working with Dr. Smith. 2 weeks later, she filed a complaint about suspicious prescriptions. The next day, she died in a car accident. Her brakes failed. Suddenly, the police station door opened. It was Tom, Kate's son, out of breath from running. "Mom!" he cried. "I just saw Dr. Smith at our house. He was putting something in our mailbox." Kate and Mike rushed to her house. In the mailbox was a letter. Inside were photos. Photos of Kate at the police station that very night. Photos of her kids at school. Photos of her taking the pills from Mrs. Roberts' house. With the photos was a note. "Your mother should have taught you not to stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Think about your children." But there was something else in the envelope that Dr. Smith hadn't meant to include. A small piece of paper that had stuck to one of the photos. It looked like part of a letter, with just a few words visible. "Wilson Construction Company. Underground toxic waste. Need these properties." The mystery was getting deeper and more dangerous. With each passing hour, Kate looked at Mike, her heart pounding. "We need to warn Mrs. Roberts right now." But as they turned to leave, Mike's police radio crackled to life. "All units to Green Street. We have another death to investigate. Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've maintained the simple language while adding new layers to the conspiracy, introducing more characters and raising the stakes with direct threats to Kate and her children. The mysterious paper fragment also hints at an even bigger scandal involving toxic waste, which we can explore further in the next section." Kate's heart stopped when she heard the police radio. She and Mike raced to Green Street in his police car, sirens blaring, but they weren't heading to Mrs. Roberts' house. The call was coming from number 42, where old Mr. Harris lived. Like the others, he had refused to sell his house to Mr. Wilson. They found Mr. Harris in his kitchen, But something was different this time. There was a knocked over cup of coffee on the table and broken glass on the floor. This didn't look like the peaceful deaths of the others. "He fought back," Mike whispered to Kate. "He knew something was wrong." While other police officers arrived, Kate noticed something stuck under the kitchen table, a small tape recorder. Her hands shaking, she slipped it into her pocket when no one was looking. Just then, Dr. Smith walked in. "I heard the call," he said smoothly. "Such a tragedy. I just gave Mr. Harris his medicine yesterday." Kate watched as Dr. Smith moved toward the body, probably to declare another natural death. But before he could reach Mr. Harris, Mike stepped forward. "I'll need that medicine bottle, doctor," Mike said firmly. "This death looks suspicious." Dr. Smith's friendly smile flickered for just a second. "Of course," he said, "but I'm afraid Mr. Harris already took all the pills. Such a shame." Later that night, after making sure Tom and Lisa were safely at their aunt's house, Kate sat in her car listening to Mr. Harris's tape recorder. At first, there was just normal kitchen sounds. Then she heard voices. "You can't keep doing this, Smith." It was Mr. Harris. "I know what you and Wilson are up to. I saw the trucks at night. I know what's buried under these properties." Now, Mr. Harris." Dr. Smith's voice was calm. "Think about your heart condition. You should take your medicine." "No," Mr. Harris shouted. "I called the EPA. They're coming tomorrow to test the soil. It's over, Smith. You and Wilson can't." The recording ended with the sound of breaking glass. Kate's hands were trembling as she drove to Mike's house, but halfway there, she noticed a black car following her. She tried to lose it by turning down side streets, but it stayed right behind her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Stop digging, Kate," a man's voice said. It wasn't Dr. Smith. "We know about the tape. Think about what happened to Nurse Sarah's brakes." Kate hung up, her heart pounding. She couldn't go to Mike's house now. They were watching her. Instead, she drove to Pinetown Library. Betty, the night librarian, had been her mother's friend for 40 years. "I need to look at old town records," Kate told Betty, "from 20 years ago, when Dr. Smith first came to town." Betty looked around carefully before whispering, "Follow me to the basement." In the dim basement, Betty pulled out a dusty box. "Your mother asked for these same records last month," she said. "She was looking for something about Wilson Construction Company." Inside the box, Kate found something strange. A 20-year-old newspaper article about a mysterious fire at City Hall. All property records from the previous 10 years had been destroyed. The fire happened one day after Dr. Smith arrived in Pinetown. But there was something else in the box, a faded photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of Wilson Construction Company. Kate recognized a younger Mr. Wilson, and next to him, smiling at the camera, was Dr. Smith. The date on the photo was 2 years before Dr. Smith supposedly came to Pinetown. "Betty," Kate whispered, "who owned all these houses before the current owners?" Betty's face went pale. "Wilson Construction owned most of Green Street back then. They sold the houses cheap, right after that big chemical company closed down." Suddenly, the library lights went out. They heard footsteps on the basement stairs. "Hide!" Betty whispered, pushing Kate behind a shelf. "And Kate, your mother left something else here for you. It's in the old dictionary on my desk. Get it when it's safe." The basement door opened. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Anyone down here?" called a familiar voice. It was Bill Cooper, Dr. Smith's brother-in-law. Kate held her breath. Through a gap in the books, she could see Betty standing by her desk, casually holding the dictionary. As Cooper's flashlight swept the room, something fell from the dictionary, a small USB drive. Betty quickly kicked it under the desk. What secrets did that USB drive hold? And would Kate live long enough to find out? Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've deepened the mystery by adding the environmental angle, introduced more evidence of the conspiracy's history, and raised the stakes with direct threats and pursuit. The USB drive sets up new revelations for the next section while maintaining suspense. Kate could barely breathe as Cooper's flashlight beam swept across the basement. He took a few steps down the stairs, the wood creaking under his feet. Suddenly, they heard a voice from upstairs. "Bill, the security alarm just went off at Harris's house." It was Dr. Smith. Cooper turned and hurried back upstairs. As soon as his footsteps faded, Betty quickly grabbed the USB drive and pressed it into Kate's shaking hands. "Your mother knew this might happen," Betty whispered. "There's another way out through the old tunnel. They used it during Prohibition times to smuggle drinks. Come!" Betty pushed a shelf aside, revealing a small door. The tunnel was dark and smelled of wet earth. As Kate crawled through, Betty called softly, "Kate, remember, check the children's section of the library catalog. Your mother spent a lot of time there her last week." Kate emerged from the tunnel into the park behind the library. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mike. "Harris's house on fire. Files missing from his office. Get somewhere safe." But where was safe? They were watching her house, and now they knew she'd been at the library. Then she remembered old Miss Parker's candy store. Miss Parker had died 2 months ago, another of Dr. Smith's patients. But her sister still kept the store open at night for the high school kids. The store's bell jingled as Kate walked in. She bought a chocolate bar and asked to use the bathroom. Once inside, she plugged the USB drive into her phone. The first file was a video. Kate's mother appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. "Kate, if you're watching this, they got to me." Mary's voice was clear and strong. "But I found proof. 20 years ago, Wilson Construction used their properties to dump toxic chemicals from the old factory. They sold the houses cheap to cover it up. That's why everyone's getting sick. Harris helped me test the soil in my garden. The results are hidden in my favorite children's book at the library. Dr. Smith came to town right after the dumping to monitor the victims and keep them quiet. But now Wilson wants the properties back because the EPA is planning random soil testing in our county. They can't let that happen. Kate, there's a list of names in my..." The video cut off. Kate's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. She opened the second file. It was a scan of an old letter from the chemical company to Wilson Construction discussing disposal of sensitive materials and maintaining complete silence. Just then, Kate heard the store's bell jingle and heavy footsteps. She held her breath. "She must have gone out the back," a man's voice said. "Cooper again." "Check the bathroom," another voice ordered. Kate looked around desperately. The bathroom window was too small to climb through. Then she noticed something. Behind the mirror was a small gap. This was an old building. Many shops used to have hidden spaces to store illegal drinks. She quickly pulled the mirror aside and squeezed into the dark space behind it, pulling the mirror back just as the bathroom door opened. Through the tiny gap between the mirror and the wall, Kate watched as Cooper searched the bathroom. His phone rang. "Not here," he said, "but we found something at Harris's house before we burned it. Looks like he was working with that EPA agent, Jim Parker." Kate's heart stopped. Jim Parker, Mike's brother. That's why Mike had that file about Nurse Sarah. "Take care of both Parkers," the voice on the phone said, "and find that woman. Wilson's getting nervous. The EPA team will be here in 3 days." After they left, Kate waited 10 more minutes before crawling out. She had to warn Mike and his brother. But first, she needed to get to the library's children's section. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Smart girl, using the tunnel, just like your mother did that night. But she didn't get far. Want to know how she really died? Meet me at the old factory at midnight. Come alone, or those sweet kids of yours might need Dr. Smith's special medicine." As Kate stared at her phone, another message came through. This one from Tom's phone. "Mom, Dr. Smith is at Aunt Jane's house. He says we need vaccines for school. Would you like me to continue with the next section?" I've maintained the tension while adding new layers to the conspiracy, introducing the EPA investigation angle, revealing more about Mary's investigation and creating immediate danger for Kate's children. The story continues to build toward a larger revelation, while keeping the language accessible and the pace engaging. Kate's heart felt like it would explode. She had to choose the library or her children, but then she remembered what her mother had written in her diary. "The proof will save everyone." With shaking hands, she called Mike. "They've got your brother Jim," she said quickly. "And Dr. Smith is at my sister's house with my kids." "I'm already here," Mike whispered back, watching from my car. "Jane won't let him near the kids. Said they just had vaccines last week. He left but looked angry. Kate, Jim called me an hour ago. He's safe, hiding at the old fishing cabin. But listen, he found something big. The chemicals they buried, they're spreading into Pine River. That's why they're in such a hurry to buy the properties. EPA's water testing starts in 3 days. Kate made a fast decision. "Keep watching the kids. I need 20 minutes at the library. Then we'll get Jim's evidence and..." "No," Mike cut in. "They're watching the library. But maybe we can trick them. I'll send 3 patrol cars there now. While they're distracted, Betty can bring the book out through the tunnel." The plan worked. While police cars surrounded the library with flashing lights, Betty met Kate behind the park. She carried a worn copy of The Secret Garden, Mary's favorite children's book. "Your mother borrowed this every week," Betty said. "Look inside the cover." Kate opened the book. Inside the cover was a hidden pocket, and in it, she found papers with numbers, dates, and a small plastic bag of dark soil. "Soil samples," Betty explained, "from every yard on Green Street. Mary and Harris tested them all. And those numbers? They're account numbers. Wilson Construction paid millions to offshore accounts over the years. One belongs to Dr. Smith, another to Police Chief Rogers, and the biggest one," Betty paused, looking scared, "belongs to Mayor Wilson, Mr. Wilson's brother." Suddenly, Betty grabbed Kate's arm. "Someone's coming!" They ducked behind a tree as a car drove slowly past. Through the window, Kate saw Mr. Wilson himself, talking angrily on his phone. When he was gone, Betty whispered, "There's more. Last week, Mary showed me a video on her phone. Security footage from the old factory. You need to see it. I copied it to that USB drive, but..." Before Betty could finish, they heard a scream from the direction of Jane's house. Kate started running, the book clutched to her chest. As she reached the street, she saw an ambulance outside her sister's house. "Food poisoning," Dr. Smith was telling a small crowd of neighbors. "Mrs. Jane and the kids had some bad takeout. They'll need to stay in the hospital overnight for observation." Kate felt her world spinning. They had her sister and her children. Her phone buzzed. A photo appeared. Tom and Lisa in hospital beds, sleeping. Under it was a message. "The old factory, midnight. Bring everything you found, or they'll never wake up." But there was something strange about the photo. Kate zoomed in on the window behind the hospital beds. Instead of the hospital's usual view of Pine Street, she saw old factory equipment. They weren't at the hospital at all. Then another text came, this one from Jane's phone. "Kate, we're at old factory, basement room. Heard them talking. Not just Green Street. They're buying all river properties. Something about dam breaking soon. Hurry!" Kate ran to her car, clutching the book and USB drive. But when she opened the door, she found an envelope on the driver's seat. Inside was a very old photograph. It showed the river before the dam was built. In the background was a large building with a sign, "Anderson Chemical Storage, military-grade materials, the dam, the river, the chemicals." Suddenly, Kate understood the bigger picture and why so many had to die to keep it hidden. Her phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. "Like the photo? Your father took it right before his heart attack 2 years ago. He worked at the dam, didn't he? Knew too much, just like you. Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've escalated the situation by putting Kate's family in direct danger while revealing larger implications of the conspiracy. The dam adds a new urgent threat level, and the connection to Kate's father's death deepens the personal stakes. The story maintains its accessible language while building toward a climactic confrontation." Kate stared at the photo, memories flooding back. Her father had worked at the dam for 30 years. 2 weeks before his death, he had seemed worried, making late-night calls, checking the water levels daily. Now, it all made sense. She called Mike while driving toward the old factory. "Mike, it's bigger than we thought. Remember the dam project 20 years ago? They didn't just bury chemicals under the houses. There's a whole storage facility under the dam." "Kate, stop!" Mike's voice was urgent. "Don't go to the factory alone. Jim just called. The EPA tests weren't random. Someone reported high chemical levels in children's blood tests at Pinetown School. All the sick kids lived near the river. That's why they're rushing now. If the dam breaks, they're going to break it on purpose." Kate whispered, suddenly understanding. "The flood will wash away all the evidence. That's why they need everyone out of their houses first." Just then, Kate saw something in her rearview mirror. Dr. Smith's car was following her, but something was odd. In his passenger seat was Sarah, the nurse who had supposedly died in the car crash 3 months ago. Kate's phone rang. It was Sarah. "Pull over, Kate. I can help. I'm not working with them anymore." Could she trust Sarah? But before Kate could decide, a huge truck swerved in front of her. She slammed the brakes. Her car spun and hit a tree. When Kate opened her eyes, she was in a dim room. Sarah was holding a wet cloth to her head. "You're at my hideout," Sarah explained. "The crash wasn't bad, but we had to get you away fast. Dr. Smith thinks I'm still working for him, pretending to gain your trust. But look." Sarah pulled out a phone and played a video. It showed Dr. Smith and Mr. Wilson in the factory basement, standing over large metal containers. "Military-grade chemicals," Wilson was saying. Worth millions to the right buyers. We'll fake a natural dam break during next week's storm. Insurance will cover everyone's losses. The flood will dilute the evidence. Perfect accident. What about the sick kids? Dr. Smith asked. That's why we need the houses empty first. Wilson smiled coldly. Can't have any more unexplained deaths after the dam breaks. Bad for business. The video ended. Sarah looked at Kate with tears in her eyes. They killed my brother. He was the dam engineer who replaced your father. They made it look like suicide. Suddenly, they heard cars outside. Through the window, Kate saw police cars, but leading them was Chief Rogers. They were Wilson's men, not Mike's. Quick! Sarah pulled up a floorboard. Underground tunnel. The whole town has them from Prohibition days. This one leads to the dam control room. Your family's not at the factory. That picture was fake. They're at the old boathouse by the dam. I saw them take them there. But Kate, Sarah handed her a gun. Be careful. The boathouse is where they store the pills, where Dr. Smith does his special work. As Kate crawled into the tunnel, she heard the door crash open above. Then Sarah's voice, calm and clear. She was here, but she left. I'll tell you everything. A gunshot rang out. Kate froze in the tunnel. But there was no time to go back. Her family needed her. Her phone lit up the way as she crawled through the darkness. She saw she had one new message. From her mother's old phone number, sent just minutes ago. Should have checked the roses. M. The roses? Her mother's rose garden? But Mary was dead, wasn't she? Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've intensified the stakes by revealing the larger environmental disaster plan, while maintaining the personal danger to Kate's family. The mystery deepens with Sarah's survival, the underground tunnels, and the cryptic message suggesting Mary might not be dead. The story keeps its accessible language while building tension toward the climax. The tunnel was cold and wet, but Kate kept moving, her mother's strange message burning in her mind. The roses. There had to be something important about those roses. Suddenly she remembered. The soil samples in the secret garden book came from the rose garden, and her mother had always said, "My roses know all my secrets." Kate had thought it was just a sweet saying, but now... Her phone buzzed. A message from Mike. Found Sarah. She's alive but hurt. Says there's a computer in the boathouse with all the proof. And Kate, Chief Rogers just ordered the dam gates open for maintenance. Storm coming in 2 hours. The tunnel began sloping upward. Kate could hear the river rushing above her. Then she heard voices through the ceiling and stopped. The pills aren't working fast enough, Mr. Wilson was saying. Some people are starting to ask questions, like that nosy music teacher, Mrs. Roberts. Don't worry, Dr. Smith replied. I gave her a special dose tonight. By morning, another natural death, just like we did with Mary Jones. Kate's hand tightened on the gun Sarah had given her, but she had to stay calm. Find her family first. A loud crash came from above, followed by children's voices. Tom and Lisa. Mom! Tom was shouting. The roses! Grandma's roses! Quiet, a rough voice ordered. Kate found a loose board in the tunnel ceiling and peeked through. She was under the boathouse floor. She could see Tom and Lisa tied to chairs. Jane was there too, unconscious. Bill Cooper was guarding them while looking at his phone. Boss, Cooper called out, storm's coming faster than we thought. We need to start the dam release now. Not yet, Wilson snapped. We still haven't found that book or the USB drive, and someone's been sending messages from Mary's old phone. Search the kids again. Kate looked at her phone. No signal underground. She couldn't call Mike. But then she noticed something. Words scratched into the tunnel wall. Rose Garden Gate. Midnight. Trust the thorns. It was her mother's handwriting. But that was impossible. Unless Kate remembered something else. The night before her mother died, Mary had made a strange comment. Sometimes, honey, you have to play dead to catch the killer. Had her mother faked her own death? Was she the one helping all along? Just then, water started seeping into the tunnel. They were opening the dam gates. Kate had to act fast. She counted 3 men upstairs, Cooper, Wilson, and Dr. Smith. The gun had 3 bullets, but if she shot, her kids might get hurt in the chaos. Then she saw it. A large pipe running along the tunnel wall. It led to the boathouse's old sprinkler system, and next to it was a rusty valve. Kate suddenly remembered her father saying how the old chemical storage used the same water system as the boathouse. If she opened this valve, her phone lit up one last time before dying. Another message from Mary's number. Now, Kate, Fill the house with roses. Kate turned the valve. Above, the sprinklers burst to life, spraying decades-old chemical water everywhere. Screams erupted as the toxic liquid rained down. "My eyes!" Cooper screamed. "I can't see!" Kate crashed through the loose boards. In the chaos, she grabbed her children and Jane, pulling them toward the door. But as they reached it, Dr. Smith appeared, his face twisted in pain and rage, holding a syringe. "Going somewhere?" he snarled. Then, from behind him came a voice Kate thought she'd never hear again. "Not my family, you monster." Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've built up to a major confrontation while revealing Mary's possible survival, maintained the environmental threat, and kept the children in danger to maintain tension. The story continues to use simple language while adding layers of complexity to the plot. There, in the doorway, stood Mary Jones, very much alive. She was thinner, her hair now gray instead of its usual dyed brown, but her eyes were fierce as she swung her heavy garden shovel at Dr. Smith's hand, knocking the syringe away. "Mom!" Kate cried. "How? No time!" Mary shouted, pushing them toward the door. "Mike's coming with backup! But the damn—" A loud crack echoed through the air like thunder. Water was already rising around the boathouse. "You!" Wilson struggled to his feet, his eyes red from the chemicals. "We buried you! You buried an empty coffin!" Mary smiled grimly. "After I caught Tom taking pictures of the midnight trucks at the dam, I knew they'd come for me next. Betty helped me fake my death. We switched my heart medicine for sleeping pills that night. Been hiding in the old church basement ever since, gathering evidence." Suddenly, the boathouse creaked dangerously. Water was rushing in through the floorboards. "The roses!" Tom yelled again, pulling at Kate's sleeve. "Grandma's roses are special." Finally, Kate understood. She pulled out her mother's diary and the soil samples. The roses didn't die from the chemicals because they weren't normal roses. Dad developed them in his lab. They absorbed toxic waste. That's why you kept testing the soil. Mom, the roses were cleaning it. Cleaning it too well. Mary nodded. Wilson noticed the chemicals disappearing. That's why they had to act now. But I've been replanting those roses all along the river. Hundreds of them. The evidence isn't just in the soil samples, it's in the roses themselves. Dr. Smith lunged for the diary, but slipped on the wet floor. As he fell, something dropped from his pocket, a small notebook. Kate grabbed it. Inside were names, dates, bank accounts, records of every murder, every payoff, every cover-up. But something else fell out too. Old photos of a young Dr. Smith in an army uniform, standing in front of chemical weapons storage. "He's not even a real doctor," Mary said. "He worked at the chemical plant before it closed, when they needed someone to monitor the victims." Another crack split the air. Through the window, they could see parts of the dam starting to break. "Mom," Kate said quickly, "the kids said you've been sending messages from your old phone." "What?" Mary looked confused. "My phone was buried with the empty coffin." Just then, all their phones buzzed at once. A new message from Mary's number. "Behind you!" They spun around. There, by the back door, stood Nurse Sarah, holding Mary's old phone and a gun. "You're all so stupid," she laughed. "Did you really think I switched sides? I've been running this whole operation from the start. The Army didn't just store chemicals here, they developed them. My father was the scientist in charge. When they shut it down, he killed himself. But his work, his chemicals, they're worth billions to the right buyers. Dr. Smith was just my puppet, following orders. And now..." She raised the gun. But before she could shoot, another voice rang out. "Drop it, Sarah." Mrs. Roberts, the music teacher, stood in the doorway holding a police rifle. Behind her were Mike and a dozen EPA agents in hazmat suits. "Did you really think Mary was the only one playing dead?" Mrs. Roberts smiled. "I've been undercover for the EPA for months. Those pills you gave me? I've been analyzing them in my lab. And guess what we found?" Would you like me to continue with the next section? I've revealed Mary's survival while adding new twists with Sarah's true identity and Mrs. Roberts' undercover role. The story maintains its accessible language while building toward the final confrontation, with the dam break adding urgency to the situation. A deafening crack from the dam drowned out Mrs. Roberts' last words. Water was pouring in faster now. "Everyone out!" Mike shouted. "The whole building's going to collapse!" But Sarah wasn't giving up. She fired her gun at the ceiling, causing everyone to duck. In the chaos, she grabbed Lisa. "Nobody moves!" Sarah screamed. This child dies like my father did, poisoned by your government's lies. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tom, brave like his grandmother, threw Mary's secret garden book at Sarah's face. As she stumbled, Mrs. Roberts fired her rifle, hitting Sarah's shoulder. Lisa broke free and ran to Kate. "The roses!" Mary suddenly shouted. "Save the roses!" While EPA agents handcuffed Sarah, Dr. Smith, and Wilson, Kate finally understood the full story. The roses weren't just cleaning the soil. They were the proof. Each rose had absorbed chemicals that could be traced back to the Army's secret weapons program. "That's why they really wanted our houses," Mary explained as they rushed to safety. The roses were spreading, cleaning everything. In a few more years, there would be no evidence left of what was buried here. They watched from the hill as the dam finally broke. Water rushed through Pinetown's streets, but thanks to Mike's warning, all houses had been evacuated. "Look," Tom pointed at the water. Something strange was happening. The flood was turning bright blue wherever it touched Mary's roses, which now grew wild all along the river. "Chemical reaction," Mrs. Roberts smiled. "Those roses aren't just cleaning the soil. They're marking the toxins in the water. The perfect evidence." Suddenly, Kate remembered something. "Mrs. Roberts, Dr. Smith was going to your house tonight with pills." "Oh, those?" Mrs. Roberts laughed. "I switched them with candy pills hours ago. Left him a nice note, too. Tastes like justice, doesn't it?" As police cars surrounded the area and news helicopters circled overhead, more truth came out. Sarah's father hadn't committed suicide. He'd been murdered when he threatened to expose the weapons program. Sarah blamed the government and spent years planning her revenge, using Dr. Smith's greed and Wilson's construction company to hide the evidence. But she hadn't counted on three things: Mary's special roses, Mrs. Roberts' undercover work, and most importantly, a grandmother's love for her family. "Mom," Kate hugged Mary tightly. "All those months hiding, watching us think you were dead. Hardest thing I've ever done." Mary wiped away tears. "But I knew if they thought I was dead, I could work with Betty and Mrs. Roberts to gather evidence. We had to stop them before they hurt more families." Tom and Lisa ran to hug their grandmother too. But as they embraced, Kate noticed something odd. Down by the river, a figure in a dark coat was walking away, carrying what looked like a small box. "Mike!" Kate called out. "There's someone—" But before she could finish, all their phones buzzed one last time. A final message from Mary's old phone, which was now in police evidence. "This isn't over. Some roses have thorns that go very, very deep." Would you like me to continue with the final section? I've brought multiple plot threads together while introducing a new mystery element that suggests a deeper conspiracy. The story maintains its accessible language while setting up for the conclusion with personal redemption balanced against lingering danger. 1 month later, Pinetown was slowly recovering. The floodwaters had gone down, revealing the truth Mary's roses had marked in bright blue. TV news crews camped out for weeks as the story grew bigger and bigger. The truth shocked everyone. The Army's secret chemical program hadn't just been about weapons. They had tested memory-erasing drugs on soldiers. Some of those soldiers now lived in Pinetown, their memories wiped clean, given new lives and houses by Wilson Construction. Sarah, Dr. Smith, and Wilson faced murder charges. Chief Rogers resigned in shame. The mayor went to jail for taking bribes. But that mysterious figure Kate saw by the river was never found. Mary moved back into her house on Green Street. Her roses now grew everywhere, praised as heroes in science magazines. The government even named them Phoenix Roses because they rose from the dead, like Mary had. One quiet evening, Kate and her family were having dinner at Mary's house. Their first normal Sunday dinner since everything happened. The doorbell rang. It was Betty from the library looking scared. "You need to see this," she whispered, holding out an old VHS tape. "I found it hidden inside the library wall during repairs." They watched the tape together. It showed an Army meeting from 30 years ago. A young scientist was speaking. "The memory drugs are ready, but some soldiers are fighting it. Their children seem immune." The scientist was Sarah's father, but behind him stood another familiar face, the mysterious figure from the river, 30 years younger. Just then, Tom came running in from the garden. "Mom! Grandma! The roses are glowing!" They rushed outside. All along Green Street, Mary's roses were giving off a soft blue light. Kids were coming out of their houses, pointing at the strange glow. "It's happening." Mrs. Roberts appeared at the garden gate. The roses aren't just cleaning chemicals, they're waking up memories. Everyone who was exposed to the drugs, their memories are coming back. People were gathering in the street, looking confused, but amazed. Old Mr. Parker from the grocery store suddenly sat down on his porch, crying. "I remember," he kept saying. "I was a test subject. I remember everything." Kate's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Phase 1 complete. The roses have done their job. Phase 2 begins now. Some secrets need to stay buried. Choose your side carefully. Attached was a photo of Kate's father on the day he died, meeting with Sarah's father, who was supposed to be dead years before that photo was taken. Mary grabbed Kate's hand. "Honey," she said softly, "I think we need to plant more roses." Tom and Lisa looked up at their mother and grandmother, their faces glowing blue in the light of the roses. "Does this mean our next Sunday dinner might be interrupted too?" Lisa asked. Everyone laughed, but Kate saw her mother's face turn serious as she watched more people gathering in the street, their memories awakening. "The thorns go deep," Mary whispered, using Sarah's words from that last message. "And I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface." In her garden, the roses continued to glow, their light spreading like truth through the darkness, promising more mysteries to come. Because in Pinetown, what looks like a natural death might just be the beginning of a much bigger story.